Well, it seems the Tigers have finally worked out that their biggest problem has been their administration. Sides generally don't become this bad or dysfunctional overnight. It takes time and years of wrong decisions to finally bottom out what the Tigers have done. Because any competent administration, if they have a couple of lean years, eventually gets their ducks in a row and things move forward. And I know it's an old cliche, but Jack Gibson was right when he said success starts in the front office. So just how can the Tigers get back to finals football? Now, let's go back an entire decade, or even over a decade, to the last time the Tigers were actually good. In 2011, they finished 4th and they made a semi-final, but since then things have just gone downhill. In 2012, they were 10th, then 15th, 13th, 15th, 9th, 14th, 9th, 9th, 11th, 13th, and then 2 consecutive wooden spoons. In that time, they have gone through 9 coaches if you count interims and the 2 versions of Tim Sheens, who bookends those 2 periods. He's at the start, he's at the end of his Tigers career, and the Tigers are a decent football team. And when he comes back, he's done a review, decided he's the best person for the job, and then after 1 year of a 2-year deal, decides he's done. And all of that has happened despite having quite a talented junior crop that have come through during that decade. They, of course, had the big Fab Four in the early 2010s, but they had 4 and very quickly they had 1 due to poor management and administration. They lost Tedesco pretty quickly, followed by Aaron Woods, and then Mitchell Moses decided he wasn't sticking around for much longer and he left in the middle of 2017, leaving Luke Brooks. Now Brooks has gone to Manly and the Tigers are looking at a new batch of juniors. For me, bad NRL sides come in 2 forms. They're either a dysfunctional administration that bleeds onto the football field and has years and years of underperforming, or it's simply a couple of bad recruitment decisions or a coaching appointment that eventually is rectified by a competent administration. And it's generally easier to fix just one bad coaching appointment or even a slightly messed up salary cap, because a few years, a couple of right appointments and you're back on track. Just look at Brisbane. Of course, appointing Anthony Seibold turned out to be a very, very wrong move and they bottomed out very quickly. However, their actual recruitment and retention meant they retained a lot of their talented players and recruited some new ones, and particularly highlighted by the recruitment of Adam Reynolds and the return of Reece Walsh. They ended up having a very, very competent squad that got into a grand final last year. As I said, that's down to their administration. Their administration wasn't the problem. It was, how do we move on from Wayne Bennett, which is always going to be a challenge, whichever club Wayne coaches at. And if you want an example of incredibly bad administration bleeding into the football department, then look no further than the Parramatta Eels. I'll take you back to 2009. During 2009, they had an election. And led by Royce Spagnolo, the 3P party came first, and they replaced virtually the entire board. Dennis Fitzgerald lost his power as the Emperor of Parramatta. And initially they had a little bit of on-field success, but that was basically down to Jared Hayne doing Jared Hayne things in 2009 and some legacy appointments and decisions that were made by previous administrations regarding their junior development. But very quickly things began to unravel. In 2010, Daniel Anderson was sacked as head coach a year after making the grand final, despite the fact he had the backing of the senior playing group. And that was a very, very experienced senior playing group led by Nathan Kalis, Nathan Hindmarsh and Luke Bird. Then the club went through Stephen Kearney, who was one of those bad coaching appointments. He was a rookie coach, completely out of his depth, and that was then combined with incredibly poor recruitment and retention throughout 2011 and 2012. They then turned their attention to Ricky Stewart, who turned up, sacked 12 players, and then promptly sacked himself and headed to Canberra, leaving Parramatta in a steaming mess. And that then led to the appointment of Brad Arthur. He was an interim coach under Stephen Kearney during 2012 and helmed the club for 6 games before moving on to Manly as an assistant. And since then, the Eels have kind of got things right in the coaching department and have completely reformatted their administration. But it wasn't through their complete own doing like we're seeing at the Tigers. If we go to 2016, well, they were dissolved by the New South Wales government. Completely inept administration, which saw the Steve Sharp-led Para First Party took charge in 2015, and by 2016 they were recording in their meeting minutes how to cheat the salary cap.
Is you taking notes on a criminal fucking conspiracy?
Very quickly, the New South Wales government stepped in, dissolved the board, and appointed an administrator. And surprisingly, the Eels actually picked up in 2017. They finished in the top 4 and made the finals for the first time in nearly 10 years. 2018 happened and they bottomed out with a wooden spoon, but that was again more due to poor recruitment and retention than an issue with their administration. In 2019, a new board was installed, the administration process was complete, and since then the Eels have made 4 final series out of 5, including a grand final. They seem, on an administration side of things, to have got their shit together. Cleary wasn't exactly sacked by the Tigers. He walked out and went back to Penrith. But anyone with half a brain could see Ivan wanted to coach Nathan. And he wasn't going to stick around at the Tigers forever, and nor was Nathan really going to come to the Tigers. He's a Penrith junior and he'd learnt most of his football out there in Penrith. He wasn't going anywhere. So really, should they have appointed Ivan Cleary in the first place? The jury's still out. But in terms of coming in and wrecking a club, well, Ivan Cleary and Ricky Stewart can change notes there. The Tigers, though, they now have an interim CEO in Shane Richardson and an interim chairman in Barry O'Farrell, and it seems like the adults are in charge. And they have already begun to make some changes there. Scott Fulton is out as recruitment manager because he disagreed with Benji Marshall. And this is one of the key things about having a competent administration. The old administration appointed a recruitment manager that did not gel with the head coach, and you cannot have that happening. The two need to be working in concert with each other. Sure, they can disagree in terms of recruitment and retention targets, but ultimately they have to be able to work together, and this clearly wasn't the case. Fulton's only been there a few months, but he's gone, and Shane Richardson has signalled that there are going to be some more changes throughout the Tigers administration. And it can only do the Tigers a world of good to no longer have Mr. Fedora as chairman, who seemed to like to threaten fans with, legal summonses and threatening with cease and desist letters and insulting fans, basically saying that if you're not a paid up member, then you don't really matter to the Tigers. And that is not a way that you're going to build a very large supporter base or actually cash in on it from a merchandising and commercial perspective. And just on that, the vanity project that was installed by the former CEO, Justin Pascoe, with their Tales from Tiger Town, was like if you ordered Welcome to Wrexham on Wish. The last thing that struggling side needed was a bunch of cameras on the walls and following them around as they tried to rebuild the club. So with their administration kind of getting back underway and actually having competent people in charge, it's now up to the football side of things to click into gear. They have made plenty of changes and decisions in the past few seasons, and they've of course recruited relatively well with Apisai Coruscant and Isaiah Papali'i. They've released Luke Brooks, which honestly is for the best. I mean, Brooks was clearly weighed down by the levels of expectation there at the Tigers, and now he's gone off to play second fiddle at Manly, which is probably going to suit him a lot more, given he's no longer going to have the pressure of an entire club on him. The only challenging part is, though, they don't really know what their halves combination is going to be in 2024. They've recruited Aiden Caesar back from the Super League, and he's had a few years out of the NRL, while, as I mentioned, Brooks has moved on. Adam Dwayhe is coming back from an ACL injury, so it could be a little bit of a rough start to the 2024 season until they settle on their halves pairing. And there's also plenty of work to get done on both sides of the ball. Last year, they were the worst attacking side in the competition and the second worst defensive side. You're not going to be able to change all of that in one off-season. It's a lot of improvement in a very short space of time. They've also got some very raw forwards, though, alongside some very experienced ones in John Bateman, Alex Twile and David Clemmer. So they seem to have a fairly good mix of inexperience, but also very experienced and international players. And they have done some shrewd movements in the player market recently. Sean Blorg heading down to Melbourne, and Justin Olam coming up and playing in the centres for the Tigers. Justin Olam, whilst he's towards the end of his career now, he's the type of player that you can use to bring through your next crop. He's experienced, he's a premiership winner, and he's an international. They're kind of all the things you need in a very young backline, which is what the Tigers have. But perhaps the biggest challenge of all is going to be having a rookie head coach. Benji Marshall is not far removed from his playing days, and he's had a very, very short apprenticeship as a coach. He was supposed to be assistant coach this season, but Tim Sheen's decided he had enough and has moved on. We see coaches, particularly rookie coaches who don't have a long apprenticeship, struggle early on in their coaching careers. You really need those early years of being a head coach in the lower grades or overseas to be able to understand what you want as a coach and how to get the best out of your players. Benji is obviously a very respected member of the Tigers and he's a legend of the game, but that doesn't necessarily translate into being a good head coach. Even players with long apprenticeships, such as Trent Barrett, who spent quite a long time as an understudy, struggled at both his head coaching appointments at the Bulldogs and at Manly, but has found a niche for himself as a very good assistant coach. And the trouble for a lot of rookie coaches is that they take over at a struggling club. Brad Arthur at Parramatta, Trent Barrett at both Manly and the Bulldogs, Cameron Ciraldo at the Bulldogs. It's not an easy place to get your career started. Andrew Demetrio was quite fortunate to have followed Wayne Bennett at Souths, where a lot of the infrastructure was already set up for him, but even he has struggled since Bennett has left and he's had to take over the head coaching reins there. And it's not going to be a quick fix for the Tigers. On average, a rookie coach only manages to improve their side by 1 win during an entire season. And if you look at the 2023 table, even 1 win due to their horrendous for and against doesn't get them above 17th. But who knows? Maybe they'll pull a Warriors and they'll end up making the finals and they'll get a lot of support from the NRL, which is what Andrew Webster managed to do in his first full season as head coach. And there will be plenty of bumps on the road for the Tigers as they go down this process. But maybe, just maybe, they can avoid a 3rd consecutive wooden spoon. Thank you very much for joining me this week. If you enjoyed the content, please give us a like and subscribe. It helps the channel massively. I'll be back next week, every Wednesday, and we'll be continuing this throughout the 2024 NRL season. So until next time, bye for now.